At 11:43 on the morning of November 25, 1940, a yellow-painted aircraft rolled onto the grass runway at Hatfield Aerodrome, 20 miles north of London. The plane weighed 13,400 pounds empty. Its wingspan measured 54 feet 2 inches. Its fuselage was 40 feet 6 inches long. None of these numbers impressed the small group of Air Ministry officials watching from the edge of the field. What they saw was a wooden airplane. Geoffrey de Havilland, Jr. sat in the cockpit, 30 years old, chief test pilot for de Havilland Aircraft Company, son of the company's founder. He had flown 47 different aircraft types in his career. This one had no guns, no turrets, no defensive armament of any kind. The officials from the ministry had spent 18 months telling his father this airplane would never work. They called it Freeman's Folly, after Air Vice Marshal Wilfred Freeman, the only man in the Air Ministry who had supported the project. They called it a wooden wonder, and they did not mean it as a compliment. One senior official had written in a memo that building combat aircraft from wood was going backwards 25 years. Another suggested the company should focus on real airplanes instead of furniture. The two Rolls-Royce Merlin engines started with a cough and settled into a steady roar, 1,460 horsepower each. The same engines that powered Spitfires and Hurricanes. De Havilland released the brakes. The aircraft accelerated down the grass strip. At 180 miles per hour, de Havilland pulled back on the control column. The wooden airplane lifted off the ground and climbed into the gray November sky. The officials watched. Some checked their watches. One lit a cigarette. They expected problems. They expected the kind of embarrassing failure that would finally kill this project and free up factory space for proper metal aircraft. De Havilland climbed to 5,000 feet and began his test sequence. He pushed the throttles forward. The needle on his airspeed indicator moved past 300 miles per hour, past 350, past 380. At 6,000 feet over Hertfordshire, the wooden airplane reached 388 miles per hour in level flight.
The Spitfire Mark II, Britain's frontline fighter, had a maximum speed of 357 miles per hour. The wooden airplane was 31 miles per hour faster than the fastest fighter in the Royal Air Force. De Havilland put the aircraft through turns, dives, and climbs. The wooden structure held. The controls remained responsive. After 28 minutes in the air, he brought the aircraft back to Hatfield and landed smoothly on the grass runway. The officials said nothing. One of them walked to his car and drove away without speaking to anyone. The project they had tried to kill for 18 months had just proven itself faster than any aircraft in British service. The airplane was designated DH-98. It would become known as the Mosquito, and it would become the most versatile combat aircraft of World War II. But that morning at Hatfield, it was still just a wooden experiment that the British Air Ministry wanted to cancel.
The story of the Mosquito begins not with Geoffrey de Havilland Jr., but with his father. Geoffrey de Havilland Sr. built his first airplane in 1909 in a shed behind his family home. He was 27 years old, a motor bus engineer with no formal training in aeronautics. He had saved £1,000, borrowed 500 more from his grandfather, and spent it all on an engine and materials. The first aircraft crashed on its first flight attempt. De Havilland rebuilt it. The second version flew. By 1920, he had founded the de Havilland Aircraft Company at Stag Lane Aerodrome near London. The company specialized in light aircraft, trainers, and civilian planes. The DH-60 Moth became the standard training aircraft for flying clubs across the British Empire. The DH-88 Comet won the 1934 Mack Robertson Air Race from England to Australia. De Havilland understood something that larger aircraft manufacturers did not. He understood wood. His company had spent 2 decades perfecting techniques for building strong, lightweight wooden structures. They knew how to laminate birch plywood for strength. They knew how to use balsa wood for lightweight cores. They knew how to shape spruce into load-bearing spars.
In 1936, de Havilland began thinking about a new kind of military aircraft. Germany was rearming. Another war seemed possible, perhaps probable. De Havilland looked at the aircraft being designed for the Royal Air Force and saw a problem. The new bombers, the Wellington, the Hampden, the Whitley, were built from aluminum and steel. They required specialized factories, trained metal workers, and raw materials that Britain would have to import during wartime. Aluminum came from bauxite ore. Britain had almost no bauxite deposits. In a long war, aluminum would become scarce.
Wood was different. Britain had forests. Britain had furniture factories. Britain had thousands of skilled woodworkers who could be trained to build aircraft components. A wooden airplane could be built in dispersed workshops across the country, safe from bombing raids that might destroy centralized metal aircraft factories. De Havilland also understood aerodynamics. A smooth wooden surface created less drag than riveted metal panels. A wooden aircraft, properly designed, could be faster than its metal equivalent. By early 1938, de Havilland had sketched the basic concept, a twin-engine bomber built almost entirely from wood. No defensive guns, because guns added weight and drag. No turrets, because turrets required gunners, and gunners added more weight. The aircraft would rely on one thing for survival: speed. If a bomber could fly faster than enemy fighters, it did not need guns. It did not need armor. It did not need a crew of 7 to operate defensive weapons. It could carry a crew of 2, pilot and navigator, and use the weight savings for fuel and bombs. The concept was radical. Every bomber in service with every air force in the world carried defensive armament. The doctrine was established. Bombers needed guns to survive. De Havilland was proposing to abandon that doctrine entirely. He brought the concept to the Air Ministry in September 1938. The response was dismissive. The idea of building a wooden aircraft for the Royal Air Force is not one which we can entertain, wrote one official. Another noted that wooden construction is not suitable for a first-line military aircraft. A third suggested that Mr. de Havilland's expertise is in sporting and training aircraft, and that he should leave combat aircraft to firms with appropriate experience. De Havilland revised his proposal and submitted it again in October 1938. Rejected. He submitted a third version in February 1939. Rejected. He submitted a fourth version in July 1939, 2 months before Germany invaded Poland. This version included detailed performance calculations showing the proposed aircraft would reach 397 miles per hour, faster than any fighter in Luftwaffe service. The Air Ministry rejected it again. The rejection letters all contained the same fundamental objection. Wooden aircraft were obsolete. Modern air forces flew metal planes. A wooden bomber would be fragile, slow to produce, and unsuitable for combat conditions. The ministry was ordering thousands of metal bombers and had no interest in diverting resources to an experiment in antique construction methods. One officer summarized the ministry's view in a memo dated August 1939. "We are not in the business of building flying furniture." But one man disagreed. Air Vice Marshal Wilfrid Freeman was responsible for research and development at the Air Ministry. He had read de Havilland's proposals carefully. He understood the strategic logic. If Britain went to war with Germany, aluminum supplies would be critical. Every pound of aluminum used for bombers was a pound not available for fighters. A wooden bomber would free up aluminum for Spitfires and Hurricanes. Freeman also understood that de Havilland's performance calculations were probably accurate. The company had a track record of building fast aircraft. The DH-88 Comet had beaten purpose-built racing planes in the Mack-Robertson race. If de Havilland said his wooden bomber would reach 400 miles per hour, Freeman believed him.
On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. 2 days later, Britain declared war on Germany. Freeman moved quickly. On September 12, 1939, he issued a contract to de Havilland for a detailed design study of a wooden bomber. The contract was worth £7,500. It was not authorization to build aircraft, just to complete detailed drawings and specification. The Air Ministry bureaucracy immediately tried to kill the project. A committee reviewing aircraft production priorities recommended canceling the de Havilland contract in November 1939. Freeman overruled them. Another committee recommended cancellation in December 1939. Freeman overruled them again.
By January 1940, de Havilland had completed detailed designs. The aircraft would use a stressed skin construction technique the company had developed over 2 decades. The fuselage would be built in 2 halves like a clamshell from laminated plywood over a balsa wood core. The wings would use spruce spars with plywood covering. The entire structure would be bonded with casein glue, made from milk protein. The construction method had one significant advantage. It could be done by workers with no experience building aircraft, furniture makers, piano manufacturers, coffin builders. Anyone who knew how to work with wood could be trained to build mosquito components in a matter of weeks. Freeman authorized construction of a single prototype on March 1st, 1940. The authorization came with a warning. Lord Beaverbrook, the press baron, appointed Minister of Aircraft Production in May 1940, hated the project. He called it a waste of resources. He believed Britain should concentrate exclusively on fighters, Spitfires and Hurricanes to survive the coming German air assault. Anything that diverted workers, engines, or factory space from fighter production was, in Beaverbrook's view, sabotage. In June 1940, Beaverbrook ordered the Mosquito project canceled. Freeman went directly to Beaverbrook's office and argued for 2 hours. He explained the strategic logic. He showed the performance calculations. He pointed out that the Mosquito used Merlin engines that could not be installed in Spitfires anyway. The production lines were separate. Beaverbrook relented. The project could continue, but only if it did not interfere with fighter production. De Havilland was given no priority allocation of materials or workers. The prototype would be built with whatever resources the company could scrape together on its own. The prototype was built in secret at Salisbury Hall, a Tudor mansion 5 miles from the Hatfield factory. De Havilland had chosen the location specifically because it was hidden from German reconnaissance aircraft. The house was surrounded by trees. A German bomber flying overhead would see nothing but an old building in the countryside. Workers converted the banquet hall into an assembly shop. They built jigs from timber bought at local lumber yards. They worked 12-hour shifts 7 days a week. The fuselage was constructed in the banquet hall. The wings were built in tents erected on the lawn outside. By September 1940, the prototype was taking shape. The fuselage was complete. 1 wing was attached. But the Luftwaffe was bombing London and aircraft factories across southern England. On September 3rd, a German bomb damaged the de Havilland factory at Hatfield, destroying several aircraft under construction. The Salisbury Hall workshop was never discovered. Hidden in plain sight, 5 miles from a factory the Germans bombed repeatedly, workers continued building a wooden airplane that the Air Ministry still expected to fail. On November 3rd, 1940, the completed prototype was disassembled, loaded onto trucks, and transported to Hatfield. Reassembly took 3 weeks. Ground tests revealed minor problems with the hydraulic systems and landing gear. Engineers worked through the nights to fix them. On November 19th, Geoffrey de Havilland Jr. conducted taxi tests on the Hatfield runway. The aircraft handled well. The engines ran smoothly. The brakes worked. Everything was ready for the first flight. November 25th, 1940, overcast sky, light wind from the southwest. Temperature 46 degrees Fahrenheit. De Havilland took off at 11:43 and flew for 28 minutes. When he landed, he reported that the aircraft handled beautifully and that the predicted performance figures appeared accurate. The officials from the Air Ministry who witnessed the flight filed their reports.
Within a week, the tone of internal memos began to change. References to wooden experiment became high-speed bomber prototype. Freeman's Folly was quietly renamed the de Havilland Project. On December 20th, 1940, the Air Ministry ordered 50 Mosquito bombers. Production began in early 1941, but the Mosquito's troubles were not over. The aircraft's wooden construction created problems that de Havilland's engineers had not anticipated. The casein glue used to bond the plywood components was sensitive to moisture. In tropical climates, the glue could fail, causing structural separation. Aircraft deployed to humid environments developed cracks along glue joints. In one case, a wing panel separated during flight. De Havilland engineers developed new glue formulations and improved sealing techniques. They tested components in humidity chambers to identify weak points. By late 1941, the moisture problems were largely solved, but the delays had slowed production. There was also the question of what exactly the Mosquito should do. The original concept was a high-speed bomber, but the Air Ministry kept changing its mind. In February 1941, they wanted a photo reconnaissance variant. In April 1941, they wanted a fighter version with cannons and machine guns. In June 1941, they wanted a night fighter with radar. In August 1941, they wanted a fighter-bomber that could carry bombs and also engage enemy aircraft. De Havilland tried to accommodate all of these requirements, designing multiple variants simultaneously. The bomber version had a glazed nose for the bomb aimer. The fighter version had a solid nose packed with 4 20mm Hispano cannons and 4 .303 Browning machine guns. The photo reconnaissance version had cameras mounted in the bomb bay. The night fighter version had a bulbous radome containing AI radar. Each variant required different tooling, different components, different crew training. Production was fragmented across multiple factories, each building a different version. By October 1941, only 20 Mosquitoes had been completed, but those 20 aircraft proved the concept. On September 20th, 1941, a Mosquito flew a photo reconnaissance mission over Bordeaux and La Pallice in occupied France. The aircraft photographed German naval installations at 25,000 feet and returned to base without being intercepted. No German fighter could climb fast enough to reach it. On December 15, 1941, a Mosquito set a speed record for the route between London and Gibraltar, 1,300 miles in 3 hours, 42 minutes. The previous record holder, a Lockheed Hudson, had taken over 5 hours. The Mosquito was everything de Havilland had promised. It was faster than German fighters. It could fly higher than German fighters. It could outrun any threat it encountered. The Air Ministry ordered another 300 aircraft.
The first combat operation came on May 31, 1942. 4 Mosquito bombers from 105 Squadron took off from RAF Horsham St. Faith at 04:15. Their target, Cologne, Germany. The city had been devastated by a massive RAF raid the previous night, the first 1,000-bomber raid of the war. The Mosquitoes were sent to photograph the damage. The flight leader was Squadron Leader A.R. Oakeshott. He flew at 25,000 feet, above the effective ceiling of German anti-aircraft guns. German fighters scrambled to intercept, but the Mosquitoes were already over the target by the time they reached altitude. Oakeshott's aircraft photographed the smoking ruins of central Cologne from 25,000 feet. The other 3 Mosquitoes photographed industrial areas north and south of the city. All 4 aircraft returned to base without damage. That evening, the photographs were developed and analyzed. They showed that 12,000 buildings had been destroyed or damaged in the Cologne raid. The photographs made front-page news in British newspapers the following day. The first time the British public saw evidence of the bombing campaign's effectiveness. But photography was just one mission type. On September 25, 1942, 4 Mosquitoes from 105 Squadron flew the mission that would define the aircraft's reputation. The target was the Gestapo headquarters in Oslo, Norway. The building housed records on Norwegian resistance fighters, and the RAF had been asked to destroy it
before the Germans could use those records to arrest and execute hundreds of Norwegians. The mission required extreme precision. The Gestapo headquarters was in the center of Oslo, surrounded by civilian buildings. A missed bomb could kill Norwegian civilians. A near miss might not destroy the records.
The first combat operation came on May 31, 1942. 4 Mosquito bombers from 105th Squadron took off from RAF Horsham St. Faith at 04:15. Their target, Cologne, Germany. The city had been devastated by a massive RAF raid the previous night, the first 1,000-bomber raid of the war. The Mosquitoes were sent to photograph the damage. The flight leader was Squadron Leader A.R. Oakeshott. He flew at 25,000 feet above the effective ceiling of German anti-aircraft guns. German fighters scrambled to intercept, but the Mosquitoes were already over the target by the time they reached altitude. Oakeshott's aircraft photographed the smoking ruins of central Cologne from 25,000 feet. The other 3 Mosquitoes photographed industrial areas north and south of the city. All 4 aircraft returned to base without damage. That evening, the photographs were developed and analyzed. They showed that 12,000 buildings had been destroyed or damaged in the Cologne raid. The photographs made front-page news in British newspapers the following day, the first time the British public saw evidence of the bombing campaign's effectiveness. But photography was just one mission type. On September 25, 1942, 4 Mosquitoes from 105th Squadron flew the mission that would define the aircraft's reputation. The target was the Gestapo headquarters in Oslo, Norway. The building housed records on Norwegian resistance fighters, and the RAF had been asked to destroy it before the Germans could use those records to arrest and execute hundreds of Norwegians. The mission required extreme precision. The Gestapo headquarters was in the center of Oslo, surrounded by civilian buildings. A missed bomb could kill Norwegian civilians. A near miss might not destroy the records. The Mosquitoes would attack at low level, below 50 feet, and place their bombs directly into the building. The attack was scheduled for noon, when the maximum number of German personnel would be inside, and Norwegian civilians in neighboring buildings would be at lunch elsewhere. The flight leader was Wing Commander Huey Edwards, an Australian who had won the Victoria Cross for a low-level attack on Bremen in 1941. The 4 Mosquitoes flew across the North Sea at wave-top height to avoid German radar. They climbed to 1,000 feet as they crossed the Norwegian coast, then descended again as they approached Oslo. At 11:57, Edwards led his formation down the main boulevard toward the Gestapo building. He dropped his bombs from 15 feet, so low that debris from the explosion struck his aircraft as he pulled up. The bombs went through the front door. The second aircraft followed, placing bombs into the same opening. The third aircraft's bombs struck the upper floors. The fourth aircraft released its bombs into the smoke and flames and then banked hard to avoid a church steeple. All 4 Mosquitoes escaped at high speed. German fighters gave chase, but could not catch them. The Gestapo headquarters was destroyed. The records were burned. 80 German personnel were killed. 1 Norwegian civilian died, a worker in the building's basement who had not evacuated. The Norwegian government in exile sent a message thanking the RAF for the precision of the attack. If you want to know how the Luftwaffe tried to stop the Mosquito and why they failed, hit the like button now. It helps us tell more stories like this. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to the Mosquito.
The Oslo raid demonstrated something important. The Mosquito could do things no other aircraft could do. It could fly fast enough to avoid interception. It could fly low enough to place bombs with precision. It could reach targets across occupied Europe and return safely when heavier bombers were being shot down by the dozen. But the Luftwaffe was not standing still. German engineers were developing new aircraft specifically to counter the Mosquito threat. The Focke-Wulf FW-190, introduced in late 1941, was faster than the Bf-109 and posed a greater threat to low-flying Mosquitoes. The Messerschmitt Me-410, a twin-engine heavy fighter, was designed with enough speed and armament to intercept fast bombers. The Germans also improved their radar network. Early in the war, Mosquitoes could fly beneath German radar coverage and avoid detection entirely. By 1943, the Germans had deployed Würzburg radars that could track low-flying aircraft. They knew mosquitoes were coming and could direct fighters to intercept. The mosquito's advantage was eroding. Speed that had made it untouchable in 1941 was becoming merely adequate by 1943. De Havilland's engineers responded with upgrades. The Mosquito B Mark IV, introduced in 1942, had a maximum speed of 380 miles per hour. The Mark IX, introduced in late 1943, had upgraded Merlin engines producing 1,680 horsepower each. Maximum speed increased to 408 miles per hour. The Mark XVI, introduced in 1944, reached 415 miles per hour and could carry a 4,000-pound bomb, the same weapon load as a B-17 Flying Fortress, carrying a fraction of the payload over 5 times the distance. But speed alone could not guarantee survival. On the night of December 21, 1943, a German night fighter pilot named Hauptmann Wilhelm Jonen encountered a mosquito over Berlin.
Jonen was flying a Bf-110G equipped with Schrägmusik, two 20mm cannons mounted to fire upward at a 70-degree angle. The installation allowed German night fighters to attack bombers from below, where defensive gunners could not see them. Jonen's radar operator detected the mosquito at 28,000 feet over the city. The aircraft was fast, but Jonen had a height advantage. He climbed to 30,000 feet and positioned himself beneath the mosquito's tail. At 23:47, Jonen opened fire. The upward-firing cannons struck the mosquito's wing root. Fuel ignited. The wooden aircraft burned faster than a metal plane would have. The mosquito fell 28,000 feet in flames. The crew did not survive. Jonen's victory demonstrated the mosquito's vulnerability. It could outrun German fighters in level flight, but it could not outrun radar. It could survive anti-aircraft fire better than most aircraft, but it burned fiercely when hit. The Luftwaffe began focusing resources on intercepting mosquitoes. Special night fighter units, equipped with the latest radar and the fastest aircraft, were assigned to defend Berlin and other priority targets. Kill claims against mosquitoes increased through early 1944, but the losses remained remarkably low compared to other bomber types. In 1943, RAF Bomber Command lost 2.2% of heavy bomber sorties to enemy action. The mosquito loss rate was 0.63%, less than one-third the heavy bomber rate. A mosquito crew flying a tour of 30 operations had an 83% chance of survival. A Lancaster crew flying the same number of operations had a 45% chance. The mathematics were brutal but clear. Every mosquito cost 2,000 man-hours to build, compared to 75,000 for a Lancaster. A mosquito carried 2 crew members, not 7. When mosquitoes were lost, the RAF lost fewer trained aircrew and less industrial capacity than when heavy bombers went down. The mosquito was not invulnerable, but it was the closest thing to invulnerable that Bomber Command had.
By early 1944, the Mosquito had evolved into something the Air Ministry never anticipated, a precision strike weapon. The heavy bombers of RAF Bomber Command attacked by night in large formations. They dropped thousands of bombs over general target areas, knowing that only a fraction would hit anything important. The technique was called area bombing, and it was the only way to hit targets in the face of German defenses. Mosquitoes could do something different. They could find specific buildings and destroy them. On February 18, 1944, 18 Mosquitoes and 2 Typhoon fighters took off from RAF Hunsdon on Operation Jericho. Their target was Amiens Prison in northern France. The prison held over 700 prisoners, including 180 members of the French resistance scheduled for execution. The resistance had asked the British to bomb the prison walls and give the prisoners a chance to escape. If they failed, the men would be shot anyway. If they succeeded, some might live. The mission required impossible precision. The bombs had to breach the outer walls without destroying the cell blocks.
They had to kill the German guards without killing the French prisoners. They had to accomplish this at low level in winter weather against a small target surrounded by buildings. The attack leader was Group Captain Percy Charles Pickard, one of the most experienced Mosquito pilots in the RAF. Pickard had flown 100 combat missions. He had been decorated twice. He had appeared in a wartime documentary film called Target for Tonight that had made him famous across Britain. Pickard led the formation across the English Channel at 50 feet to avoid radar. The weather was terrible. Snow squalls, low cloud, visibility less than a mile. 2 aircraft became separated from the formation and turned back. The remaining 16 pressed on. At 12:01, the first wave of mosquitoes attacked the eastern wall of the prison. Their bombs struck at the base of the wall. Exactly as planned, the wall collapsed, opening a gap 20 feet wide. The second wave attacked the northern wall. More bombs, more precision strikes. Another gap opened. The third wave was supposed to bomb the guard quarters and gatehouse. Pickard orbited above the prison, assessing damage. He could see prisoners running through the gaps in the walls. The mission was succeeding. Then he saw German fighters. 2 Focke-Wulf FW-190s had scrambled from a nearby airfield. They arrived over Amiens just as the mosquitoes were completing their attack. Pickard's aircraft was caught low and slow, circling the prison. The FW-190s attacked from behind. Cannon shells struck Pickard's Mosquito in the wing and fuselage. The aircraft caught fire and crashed into a field outside Amiens. Group Captain Pickard and his navigator, Flight Lieutenant J.A. Broadley, were killed instantly. But the mission succeeded. 258 prisoners escaped through the breached walls. 102 were recaptured within days, but 156 reached safety with the resistance and survived the war. Among the survivors were 12 men who had been scheduled for execution the following week. The Amiens raid became the most famous mosquito operation of the war. It demonstrated that precision bombing could work, that aircraft could destroy specific targets in specific ways if the crews were skilled enough and brave enough. It also demonstrated the cost of such missions. Pickard was the highest-ranking RAF officer killed in a mosquito during the war. His death was front-page news in Britain. The Air Ministry received letters asking why such an experienced officer had been risked on a dangerous mission. The answer was simple. Pickard had insisted on leading because he knew the mission required the best pilot available. He was the best pilot available. He died doing what only he could do.
The death of Percy Pickard affected morale in Mosquito squadrons, but operations continued. By mid-1944, the Mosquito had become essential to the Allied war effort in ways no one had predicted when Geoffrey de Havilland first sketched his wooden bomber in 1936. Mosquitoes of RAF Coastal Command hunted German submarines in the Bay of Biscay and the North Atlantic. They carried depth charges and rockets and could attack U-boats faster than the submarines could dive. Mosquitoes of the photographic reconnaissance units mapped every inch of occupied Europe, flying at 40,000 feet where no fighter could reach them. They photographed the German rocket facilities at Peenemünde. They photographed the D-Day beaches before the invasion. They photographed bomb damage after every major raid, so planners could assess results and plan follow-up attacks. Mosquitoes flew as night fighters, defending Britain against Luftwaffe bombers and V-1 flying bombs. The night fighter version carried airborne interception radar and could hunt enemy aircraft in complete darkness. In the summer of 1944, Mosquito night fighters destroyed more V-1s than any other aircraft type. Mosquitoes flew as pathfinders for Bomber Command, arriving over targets ahead of the main force to drop marker flares that guided heavy bombers to their aiming points. The accuracy of entire raids depended on Mosquito crews finding the target and marking it correctly. And Mosquitoes flew nuisance raids, small formations of 2 or 4 aircraft that attacked Berlin and other German cities at unpredictable times, forcing the Germans to
maintain continuous air defense alert and preventing the civilian population from sleeping. The nuisance raids were particularly effective. A single mosquito carrying a 4,000-pound bomb could do as much damage as a formation of heavy bombers, while risking only 2 aircrew instead of 70. The cost-effectiveness was extraordinary. By the end of 1944, mosquitoes were flying more sorties over Germany than any other aircraft type in RAF Bomber Command. They were not dropping the most bombs. The Lancasters and Halifaxes still carried the majority of the tonnage, but they were flying the most missions, taking the most photographs, marking the most targets, and losing the fewest crews.
The most audacious mosquito operation came on March 21, 1945. The target was the Gestapo headquarters in Copenhagen, Denmark. The building housed records on Danish resistance fighters, just as the Oslo building had held Norwegian records in 1942. The resistance had requested the attack, but Copenhagen presented challenges Oslo had not. The Gestapo headquarters, Shell House, was in the heart of the city's business district. Next door was a school, the Institut Jeanne d'Arc, filled with children. A missed bomb could kill dozens of Danish civilians. The attack was planned with obsessive precision. Mosquitoes would approach at rooftop height, so low that bombs dropped with delayed fuses would penetrate Shell House horizontally, entering through windows rather than falling through the roof. The approach angle was calculated to ensure that any bomb missing Shell House would hit the street beyond, not the school. 31 mosquitoes took off from bases in England on the morning of March 21st. 18 were bombers, the rest carried cameras or provided fighter escort. They flew across the North Sea at wave-top height, then climbed slightly as they crossed the Danish coast. The first wave attacked at 11:14. Their bombs struck Shell House on the lower floors. The building began to burn. The second wave followed. More bombs, more fires. German personnel began jumping from upper floor windows to escape the flames. Then disaster struck. One mosquito from the second wave was hit by anti-aircraft fire as it approached the target. The aircraft crashed into the grounds of the Institut Jeanne d'Arc. Its bombs exploded in the school courtyard. Pilots in the third wave saw the smoke rising from the school. Some believed it was Shell House and adjusted their aim toward the smoke. Bombs that should have hit the Gestapo headquarters hit the school instead. 86 Danish children and 18 adults died in the Institut Jeanne d'Arc. The raid on Shell House was simultaneously a tactical success and a human tragedy. The Gestapo headquarters was destroyed. Records on the Danish resistance were burned. 18 Danish prisoners held in the building escaped during the confusion, but 104 civilians died, most of them children. The Copenhagen raid haunted the crews who flew it. Flight Lieutenant K.R.C. Greenwood, who had dropped bombs on the school, believing it was the target, never fully recovered from the knowledge of what he had done. After the war, he traveled to Copenhagen to meet the families of the children who had died. He spent years trying to make some kind of amends. The Danish government did not blame the RAF. They understood that the attack on Shell House had been requested by the resistance, that the risk of civilian casualties had been known and accepted, but the deaths of 86 children cast a shadow over the mosquitoes' precision bombing achievements.
The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. By that date, de Havilland had built 7,781 mosquitoes in 43 different variants. The aircraft had served in every theater of the war, from Norway to Burma, from North Africa to the Pacific. It had been a bomber, a fighter, a night fighter, a reconnaissance platform, a pathfinder, a coastal strike aircraft, and a transport. The Mosquito had dropped more bombs on Berlin than any other aircraft type. It had photographed every major German city and military installation. It had sunk submarines, destroyed V-1 launch sites, and killed more enemy aircraft in night combat than any other RAF fighter. And it had been built from wood. The material that the Air Ministry had called obsolete in 1938 had proven itself against the most advanced metal aircraft Germany could produce. The concept that officials had dismissed as going backwards 25 years had gone forward
to win a war.
Geoffrey de Havilland Jr. survived the war. He had flown the first Mosquito flight and had continued testing new variants throughout the conflict. By 1945, he was 35 years old and one of the most experienced test pilots in Britain. After the war, de Havilland Aircraft Company turned its attention to jet propulsion and high-speed flight. The company built a series of experimental aircraft designed to approach and eventually break the sound barrier. On September 27, 1946, Geoffrey de Havilland Jr. took off from Hatfield in the DH-108 Swallow, a tailless jet aircraft designed for high-speed research. The aircraft was supposed to explore the handling characteristics of swept wings at transonic speeds. At 14:23, de Havilland put the DH-108 into a dive over the Thames estuary. He was attempting to reach Mach 0.94, the fastest any British aircraft had flown. The aircraft broke apart at approximately 0.875 Mach. The fuselage disintegrated. Geoffrey de Havilland Jr. was killed instantly. His body was never recovered from the Thames estuary mud. The man who had first proven that a wooden airplane could outrun metal fighters died trying to prove that British aircraft could outrun sound. He was 36 years old. His father never fully recovered from the loss. Sir Geoffrey de Havilland continued to lead his company until 1955, when de Havilland Aircraft was merged into the Hawker Siddeley Group. He died on May 21, 1965, at the age of 82.
Today, 30 Mosquitoes survive worldwide. The largest collection is at the de Havilland Aircraft Museum in London Colney, Hertfordshire, 3 miles from Salisbury Hall, where the prototype was built in secret in 1940. The museum holds 4 Mosquitoes in various states of restoration. One of those aircraft is Mosquito B-35, serial number TA-634. It was built in 1945, too late to see combat. It served with the Royal Air Force until 1955, then spent decades in storage. In 1980, it was donated to the museum. TA-634 sits in a hangar that was once part of the Salisbury Hall estate. Visitors can walk around the aircraft, examine the wooden fuselage, peer into the cockpit where 2 men would have sat on missions over occupied Europe. Most visitors spend perhaps 5 minutes looking at the aircraft before moving on to the next exhibit. They see a vintage airplane painted in camouflage with propellers that no longer turn. They do not see the 8 years of bureaucratic warfare that produced it. They do not see the crews who died proving it. They do not see the children in Copenhagen or the burning Gestapo headquarters in Oslo. They do not see Geoffrey de Havilland Jr. lifting off from Hatfield on November 25, 1940, flying an airplane that every expert said would fail, proving in 28 minutes that everything the Air Ministry believed about wooden aircraft was wrong. At the entrance to the de Havilland Museum, there is a plaque. It reads, "The Mosquito was built because one man refused to accept that it could not be done." The plaque does not mention the officials who tried to cancel the project. It does not mention Lord Beaverbrook or the committees that recommended killing the program. It does not mention that the most versatile combat aircraft of World War II almost never existed. The Mosquito was built because Geoffrey de Havilland believed in wood when everyone else believed in metal. He was right. They were wrong. 7,781 aircraft, 43 variants. One idea that changed the course of a war.
If this story resonated with you, I want to ask you something. Hit the like button right now. Every single like tells YouTube that this story matters. It helps us reach people who have never heard of the Mosquito, who have never heard of Geoffrey de Havilland, who don't know that a wooden airplane built in a Tudor banquet hall helped win World War II. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We find these stories in archives in old books and declassified documents. We bring them back because they deserve to be remembered. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. United States? United Kingdom? Canada? Australia? Germany? We have viewers on every continent. Every comment helps us understand who cares about these stories. If someone in your family served in World War II, especially in the RAF or in any Air Force, Tell us about them. These stories connect to your stories. History is not abstract. It's made of people who lived and flew and sometimes died. Thank you for watching. Thank you for helping keep the memory of the Mosquito alive. These men built something that changed history. They deserve to be remembered. And now, you're part of making sure they are.